Good afternoon. You can hear me, I hope? A little. Be loud, okay. My proposal is about resurrecting our schools and our nation. And in my case, that nation is the United States. Not so long ago, physicians believed that most illnesses were due to an imbalance in the body's humors, which usually meant too much blood in the body. The logical remedy was bloodletting, draining out the excess blood. And for nearly 2,000 years, kings and peasants alike bared an arm so that doctors could slice open a vein. Now, the beauty of bloodletting is that it was such an easy and apparently commonsensical cure for virtually all ailments. Today, however, we grimace at that practice. We know that those well-meaning doctors of old had misdiagnosed their patients, and that far from making those patients better, they often made them sicker or even worse. Now, the point of my talk today is that the same is true for what is masqueraded as education reform in the United States. We have bloodlet our schools, but there is a better way. Now, how did this catastrophe happen? Well, Bill Gates, for example, who had never entered a public school, declared himself with his amazing wealth and resulting power the essential czar of education reform. Now, Bill Gates is a businessman, so he diagnosed that the problem with public schools was that they lacked competition, the strict accountability of an open market. And so he felt that in order to fix this first, we need to identify the failing schools, because in a market, failing companies go out of business. Shouldn't failing schools do the same? Well, he described high-stakes standardized testing to identify those schools, and then to drive them out of business, or at the very least force them to improve, give to students choice, as in vouchers in charter schools. Well, apparently it makes sense, commonsensical, doesn't it? Well, what happened? In 2001, Congress passed the No Child Left Behind Act, which mandated high-stakes standardized testing for everyone in the nation. On top of that, it insisted that by the year 2014, every single child in the country would be on grade level as measured by the test, or that child's school would be sanctioned and then closed. Whoa. So what happened? Well, the test did reveal that a lot of kids were failing. However, the most startling and the most widely suppressed revelation of those tests was that socioeconomics was by far the most powerful factor in a child's success or failure. Wealthy kids did pretty darn well, thank you very much. Poor kids, not so much. The correlation was so strong that researchers at the Economic Policy Institute, if given a child's test score, could accurately predict the wealth or the salary of that child's parents, or vice versa. Wow. So what did we do? We targeted the schools that catered to our poor kids. We shamed them. We punished them with sanctions, and we threatened them with closure. And what happened? There was a flight of teachers from those schools and even from the profession. In my state of California, during this age of reform, there was a 60% decline in enrollment in teacher education programs. Excuse me, but that is a very frightening statistic. Now, what happened in my school and my district, which wasn't terribly poor, but nonetheless, No Child Left Behind changed everything. First, we canceled almost all the field trips. Keep the kids in their seats and drill them and kill them for the test. We ended most of our project-based and interactive curriculums. We ended our progressive, authentic assessments, including our extremely rigorous writing program. We stopped teaching middle school history because it wasn't on the test. We didn't worry anymore about dropouts because those kids would have lowered our test scores. Good riddance. Many of our neighboring districts resorted to outright cheating. You see, No Child Left Behind didn't improve schools. It bloodlet them. And for me, it was painfully personal. I witnessed the ruin of my acclaimed school district, the ruin of my beloved school, the ruin of my own teaching, and the ruin of my love affair with my vocation. I was so bitter and so disillusioned, I ended up taking a 2-year leave of absence. How about the other half of the reform? Charter schools. The charter school movement started in 1988. Its stated purpose was to free a few select schools from all the onerous state and federal bureaucracy, regulations, and oversight, and allow them to pilot educational innovations that they could later share with all schools everywhere. So charters were to serve those other schools. However, they quickly morphed into those other schools' competition. Forced them to improve or go out of business. What is rarely mentioned is the fact that it's not a level playing field. First of all, charters, as you know, they don't face bureaucracy, oversight, regulations. And the minute they open up in a neighborhood, they invariably lure the best teachers, the best parents, and the best kids from the surrounding schools. However, they almost always exclude disabled kids, learning disabled kids, English language learners, students with behavioral or emotional issues. And while they're draining essential funds from all those local schools, they themselves receive outside grants to enable them to succeed. You see, it's impossible. Charters start the downward spiral of all those local schools. And wherever charters open up, socioeconomic and racial segregation skyrockets. However, charters did innovate one extremely cunning strategy to keep their costs artificially low. Charters employ almost exclusively very young, very idealistic, and therefore, very inexpensive teachers. And then they burn them out in 4 years or less. Now tell me, how is that reform? Charters will not save public schools. They will destroy them. Okay, David, you've convinced us, I hope, that the market-based reforms failed because, like bloodletting, they were based upon a misdiagnosis. Fine, well, what's the correct diagnosis, Dave? And make no mistake, our schools are in need of real and radical reform. And the problems are severe and extensive and widespread. The trouble is, those problems are what I call Voldemorts, that which must not be named. The real problems are so severe, so shameful, so frightening that we don't want to talk about them. Well, gird your loins, fasten your seatbelts. I'm going to dare to utter 5 of them. Number 1, by any indice we have, GPA, SAT scores, GRE scores, we currently recruit the majority of our teachers from the bottom percentiles of our college graduates. Now I ask you, as long as that remains the case, how can we ever hope to have a world-class educational system? Problem number 2, depending on how you measure it, somewhere between 25 and 50% of the students currently enrolled in our public schools wallow in poverty. Indeed, the United States has the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world, and nothing dooms a child more effectively and more surely to educational doom than poverty. But that's a Voldemort. We can't talk about that. Problem number 3, 70 years after the Supreme Court ruling Brown versus Board of Education, our schools stand more segregated by race and class than ever before in our nation's history. The educational gadfly, brilliant and brave Jonathan Kozol, called this the restoration of apartheid schooling in America. Apartheid schooling. And he documented in excruciating detail how separate is still not equal. We send our poor kids, predominantly African American and Latino kids, to our inner city schools that are decrepit and under-equipped. And then to add insult to injury, we give to them our least qualified students. And then we're shocked, outraged, when standardized testing reveals that they aren't learning so much. Really? This is the most heinous moral outrage of our age. But it's a Voldemort. Shh. Problem number 4. It's not just our poor kids that are struggling. If you look at any negative indice of childhood well-being, obesity, diabetes, depression, drug abuse, suicide, ADHD, anything of the above, the United States leads the world, the industrialized world. In fact, the United Nations Children Fund, in terms of childhood well-being, rates the United States 36 out of the 38 countries measured. I mean, oh my God. I mean, stop the presses, but no. Shh, it's Voldemort. And do you think all those problems have some effect on those kids' ability to do well in school? Finally, we cling to an antiquated school model. It was designed in the 19th century to prepare kids to do well in factories. In fact, we designed the schools to look a lot like factories. We run the kids along an assembly line designed according to our interests and not the interests of kids. For example, we group them by their ages and not by their abilities and aptitudes. They move along from subject to cut-up subject, regulated by bells. Sorry, that will not prepare the next generation of Americans to succeed, much less to lead the 21st century. Thanks, Dave. You've really depressed me now. So, what's the solution? The good news, in fact, the great news is it's already been done. The answer is staring us in the face. Finland. In the 1960s, Finnish schools were by any and every measure mediocre at best. Now, they are consistently rated among the finest on the planet. How did this happen? Well, the Finnish parliament had a come-to-Jesus moment, and they said, wait a minute. If our kids are not being educated well, then our economy, our democracy, our very nation is at risk. We need to make educating our children priority, national priority, number 1. And they grouped all their reforms around one core value, equity. And they vowed, we will put a great teacher into every single classroom in this nation. Excuse me, my friends, that there is commonsensical. Today, Finnish education schools accept only the top 10th percentile of graduates, of applicants. In many cases, it's harder to become a teacher than it is to become a doctor or a lawyer. All of them are required to get master's degrees, but the government pays their way. When they graduate, they earn salaries commensurate with other similarly educated professionals, and they are highly, highly esteemed. But education reform, well, Finland knew this too. Any reform must be holistic. Our schools are but the canaries in the coal mines of our nation. If our schools are in trouble, there's a hell of a lot more wrong than just our schools. We cannot reform just them. We have to reform the nation. Where do we begin? Well, I bet you can figure it out. Number 1, end the bloodletting. Put an end to the market-based reforms that are not supported by a shred of research, but are causing so much harm. Number 2, transform our teaching profession such that it now lures our best and our brightest into it, and then distribute them equitably. And then, sorry, we're going to have to finally acknowledge the Voldemorts. We're a nation in crisis, and worse, a nation in denial. We have no hope until together we confront the inconvenient truths about our children and our nation. And there's one Voldemort where I hope we begin. Let's give to every school in the United States a rating based upon the socioeconomic level of the students inside it. And let's base teacher salaries on that rating. In other words, the teachers that agree to go into our inner cities and work with our most needy kids will receive a much higher salary than their colleagues in the cush suburbs. And you know, that's the opposite of what we're currently doing. Then let's declare a Marshall Plan for our inner city schools. Let's restore them, resurrect them, make them into glorious structures with state-of-the-art science labs, sparkling swimming pools, expansive theaters. Finally, make them magnets, engineering magnets, science magnets, performing and manual arts magnets. And then step back and watch how our public schools magically desegregate themselves. If we build it, they will come. In summary, let's be like Finland. Let's act as if our children, all our children, our nation's most precious resource. Let's act as if our children are our future, because they are. Thank you.